Man, oh man, oh man. After a long day, running all around town working, you come home and somebody decides to leave a nice long recommendation on your wife's ministries page. And I just had to make a video responding to it because this dude literally wrote an essay, and it's really just so typical of the internet today. And it's literally just a long drawn out list of just fallacious, unfactual, uninformed. It's just the height of literally what you get on the internet nowadays. So I just wanted to take a few minutes right now to read it and go line by line and give a Christian perspective on these things. Because literally, according to people like this, like Christians are mindless, we're following fairy tales, we have absolutely no evidence to believe what we're believing in. And the Bible says in 1 Peter 3:15 to always be ready to give a defense. To give a Greek word, the Greek there is apologia, for the hope that is in you, right? It says, sanctify Christ in your heart as holy and do it with meekness and respect. So honestly, Brian Doyle, I love you, man. You are so misinformed. This video is going to go on the page. It's going to go on the comment. I really hope you watch it. I really hope you watch it. Just so, you don't have to believe in God. You don't have to believe in the Bible. But just please stop this unfactual, just propagation of just propaganda that's false, man. Honestly. So I'm gonna read it. I'm gonna read it line by line. I'm gonna just give you. I'll stop wherever and we'll go through it. So he starts off and says, "The Bible is a book. The Bible book is a compendium of fireside tales and fables, recounted orally for generations by goat herders and primitive tribes from the Stone Age until writing was invented." Have you read the Bible? Like, have you read it? Like, literally, in the Bible itself, it literally recounts them writing it, right? It didn't come from, if you actually knew the Bible, like if you knew, the historicity of how it was compiled, you'd know that just the errors in that recounted orally for generations by goat herders, etc. Like, just because somebody's a goat herder doesn't mean they're illiterate, right? That's almost racist. But it's not. It literally says uh, that it was written down. Like, God tells them to literally write this down. It's not generation after generation. And if you know the Bible was compiled literally over about a 1600-year period by 40 different authors, a lot of whom were not sheep herders. Some of them were actually scholars. Look up who the Apostle Paul was historically, and even used atheist sources for that. And it was immediately written down, right? Some of the stuff, maybe Genesis, that they say Genesis was written about, you know, 1500 BC or something like that, and it recounts the beginning of time. Maybe Genesis, right? Not the whole Bible. Like, that's just ridiculous, right? Was not in the Stone Age either, and it was not written before. It was not told before writing was invented. Where's your evidence? Where's your source for that? That's not scholarly, not historical whatsoever, and the actual words of the Bible refute that, and what it actually says about itself refutes that statement. Um, then he goes on and says, and then again, many different sources, transliterations, and versions were copied and written down. So, and then again, many different sources. So if it came from goat herders and shit, that literally refutes the previous statement of what you said. Don't have to go farther than that. A transliteration, for those who don't know, that's literally like, for example, uh, the word Peter in Caiaphas, right? Caiaphas means rock. It's a different. It's like Juan and John. Juan is a Spanish transliteration of the word John, right? That has no bearing on the reliability of the Bible, right? We're accurately able to translate languages today. We can go from English to Greek. Get on Google Translate. It's pretty accurate, right? As a marketing person, I'm able to literally translate English ads, marketing ads, into Spanish, and the people that read Spanish are perfectly able to understand them, and it gets the point across exactly. So, and versions were copied and written down, right? Again, completely refutes his own first statement. Next thing he says is, the Bible was created during a time where stories were orally passed down over thousands of years. Okay, and number one, no, it wasn't, because if it was, according to him, many different sources, transliterations, and versions are copied and written down. Then he says the Bible was created and during a time where stories were orally passed down. Okay, and right, if that's the primary methodology of which the cultures translated information, right, they memorized it. What's irreliable about it? Show me another source that's contradicting this, please. And passed down over thousands of years. No, it wasn't. Right? It was written over a 1500-year period. Maybe you could say that about Genesis. That's one book among 66. Maybe Genesis, maybe Exodus, right? Okay, forget it. Keep going. Stories consistently morphed and changed over time. And the Bible is a collection of these. Show me evidence of that. Show me one manuscript that was like an ancient manuscript, right? Like we have manuscripts of the Old Testament. Google Dead Sea Scrolls. Learn Hebrew, read them, see if they're any different from the English Old Testament that we have today, right? Oldest historical things we have. Show me a shred of evidence of that from history, right? Morphed and changed over time, and the Bible is a collection of these. This is why there is a nearly identical flood story from Gilgamesh. Okay. Pause. That's Genesis 7, 8, and 9, right? 3 chapters of the 50-chapter book of Genesis, right? There's over 1,000 chapters in the Bible. You referenced 3 in the Gilgamesh story. Okay, how do you know the Gilgamesh story didn't plagiarize Noah? Or it wasn't just talking about an actual historical event that happened that we actually have archaeological evidence for, right? Do me a favor. Google search whales inside of mountains. How would a whale get inside of a mountain unless the world was covered with water? Please. Secular news sources report these things. Explain that to me, please, right? That's actually modern archaeology that supports this. And how they're and if they're referencing a historical event, they would be similar, right? Next thing he says, and this is why Jesus has some of the same characteristics as Dionysus, Osiris, Horus, Mithra, and Krishna. Okay. What are those similarities? Because I've seen the internet propaganda that says, oh, Horus was born on December 25th and so was Jesus, right? Number one, the Bible doesn't say that. Okay. Oh, Horus has 12 disciples and so is Jesus. No. Doesn't actually say that. In our written historical records of Horus, he actually had 20 disciples, right? There's these similarities are literally made up, right? And this comes from literally a mythicist documentary. The source of this, it is called, oh man, I talk about it a lot because I actually got confused by this when I was about 18 years old. It's propaganda, right? It's completely mythicist propaganda. It's not true. Jesus has no similarities to Horus, right? It's like saying the story of it's not Mithra. It's one of these other deities that they say that Jesus is a copy of. It might be one of these specific ones, but it says that they were, in the story, right? When you actually go and look at the actual story, the pagan story, and the source, where we actually know historically, like what was actually said about these people, they came out of a rock, right? And they equate that to that's the same thing as Jesus being born of a virgin, because technically the rock's a virgin. Okay, yeah, real similarity there. That makes a lot of sense. And then Krishna comes after Christ, right? If anything, Krishna could have borrowed from the story of Jesus. Krishna's about, I think, 100 to somewhere between 200 and 300 AD. Didn't do a lot of research and preparation for this video, but I've seen this stuff over and over and over again. Google it yourself. Fact check me, please, right, on this. I'm asking to be fact checked on it. And all these different things, right? So he's insinuating that Jesus is a mythical person. Give me one, including atheists, right? Give me one respected, critical, historical scholar that says these things, right? Even atheists. Google Bart Ehrman, right? Bart Ehrman says that the mythicist movement, the one that says basically Jesus is not a historical person. Bart Ehrman, he literally hates Christianity. He makes video after book after video after book trying to refute Christianity. And he's like, yeah, Jesus is absolutely a historical person. He was actually crucified. And the Bible isn't even the only book that says this, right? Look up Josephus, right? Roman historian. Look up Tacitus, right? Talking about Jesus, and these are sources that are within 100 years of historical people, right? And then on top of that, the Bible, that's a historical source, right? There's nothing, no archaeological find ever refuting or contradicting the Bible. That if it says somebody's reigning, if it says Pontius Pilate is the governor of Judea at the time, we find a Pilate stone that confirms that, right? If it says that Erastus, I think it's Erastus, was the treasurer of Corinth, right? At the same time First Corinthians was written and it references him in it, they find, an inscription in Corinth of the same guy from the same time period. There's archaeological evidence confirming this stuff, right? Other books don't have this stuff. And on top of that, literally, I mean, tons and tons and tons. I think there's over 10 or 20 or more sources from the first century that talk about Jesus being a real person, right? But the internet just propagates this absolute garbage. Oh, the documentary, it's Zeitgeist that makes this. Look up Zeitgeist Refuted. Just do a YouTube search. And then literally look at the materials where they get their sources from. It's a source that chases after source, that chases after source. And nothing from the time that bears these same similarities when you actually look at the same story. Nonsense. Absolute nonsense, right? Keep reading. The contradictions and immorality in the stories are not evidence that God is flawed or evil, but rather humans invented him, just like the thousands of other gods that we used to, but no longer believe in. Okay. 1. Outside of God, outside of a supreme creator, where do you get your standard of morality, right? You get it from your culture? Do you get it from the people around you? Where did that actually come from? Because in the 1940s, I think the Germans would say in their society shaped them they'd say they were moral. But they murdered 9 million Jews in the name of the better good, etc. So where do you actually, where does your morality come from, right? The contradictions in the stories, show me a contradiction in the Bible, please. I want to see it. Post a link behind it. I'd love to see it. Haven't seen them yet. I've seen, seeming things, but they're easily reconcilable. I mean, easy. And then there's easy answers to all this stuff. And immorality in the stories, show me the immorality of God, please. I'd love to see it. I'd love to see where does that standard of morality come from that you're trying to stand on and saying God is immoral, right? And it's saying it disproves the stories in the Bible. Show me that. And how is that evidence? If right, I'm not saying God is immoral, but if he was immoral, how does that prove that he's not who he is, right? He's God. If the Bible's true and he really created all things, how is that proof against his existence? Just think about that for a second. If he did something wrong, right, and the Bible records it, how is that proof that he doesn't exist? It's not, right? It says, is not evidence God is flawed or evil, but rather humans invented him, right? How is that evidence that humans invented God? Explain that to me. That's not evidence of anything, right? That's evidence that humans recorded it accurately and they didn't leave out any details. They didn't try to make God seem better than he is, right? Just because our human understanding doesn't fully understand that, maybe some things, or it doesn't, compute or whatever it is. I'd love to see specifically what it is so I can give a specific response to it. But again, that doesn't prove that humans invented him. That means humans told the truth because they told it. It's called the criterion of embarrassment, right? If someone shares an embarrassing fact about somebody, it's more likely to be true because of stories that are obviously made up, like Zeus, or the stories that you're trying to invent. When you're saying that, just like the thousands of other gods that we used to but no longer believe in, right? Zeus was through lightning bolts, and they have these super ambiguous, tendencies to them. The God of the Bible doesn't have that, right? The Bible's cut and dry. Like, the Bible speaks, right, and it's not worried about the politically correct feelings. It's not trying to make anybody feel good. It's just speaking the truth, right? It's just speaking the truth about how things really are. And it just seems like you've never even read the Bible to even be making all these commentaries about it. But Next paragraph. And it says, and to answer the questions of many fears and mysteries of our universe, like thunder and earthquakes, since there was no science yet. Please show me in the Bible where it explains those things. Show me where the biblical narrative, when you actually read it in Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, where is it trying to explain fire and where those things come from? How does that, right? How do you get that from following the narrative? You don't. Like, if you actually read the Bible, you absolutely don't. It doesn't just say, oh, this is where thunder came from, or this is where mountains came from, or whatever. It gives blanket statements like, in the beginning, Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, right? It doesn't try to explain specific things. False. And this is the Old Testament. This is the purpose of the Old Testament, to explain where earthquakes and thunder can. Have you read the Old Testament? Just read it. Right? You wouldn't come to that conclusion if you read it, right? You don't have to believe it's inspired of God, but that statement is just completely unfactual. And it's to prey on people who don't actually know and who haven't actually read it and may be scared or whatever it is, right? It's just false, dude. Next thing it says, the New Testis is also hearsay, since these letters, gospels, and stories were written by the loyal, faithful, the camp followers, not by objective historians at the particular time. Okay. So then you're saying they're not objective. Why is there embarrassing facts? Why did women why did women discover the tomb of Jesus when women in that society, right? I'm not saying it's right, but in that society, women were counted lower than men, and that would have been an embarrassing fact for the culture at the time. Why did women destroy Jesus? Why did the Gospels portray Jesus as just scourged, and they fed him vinegar when he was on the cross? Why is their Messiah crucified if they're trying to make up a good, loyal story? Why, if they made it up to the point of death, they never recanted it? Right? They were boiled in oil. They're crucified upside down. They went through all these things. They made no money. They didn't get extreme lavish living and fame. They got persecuted for their beliefs because of what they believed in and because of what they said, right? Um, and the camp followers, this is not by objective historians. Prove that. Luke was a historian. He accurately recorded details. Show me a contradiction. Show me something saying, a historical record, an archaeological discovery, something showing that Luke, number one, did not record it in a historical fashion, and also show me something that says that something contradicting it. That's what you need to do, because actual historians, Flavius Josephus, respected sources like that, say Jesus was crucified, say Jesus actually existed, say these things happened. Um, Man, like, way off, right? And it says, and these tales were written down many years after the supposed events of this mythical Jesus. Dude, show me a historical scholar today, a respected one, historical scholar today that says Jesus was a myth. Like, it's laughable when people come up with this garbage. It comes from zeitgeist. It was made up by like a loon, dude. No historical background. And it's confirmed by other historical sources besides the Bible, right? And they were written down many years after. No, they weren't. Defined many years after. First Corinthians, the 15th chapter, comes from a creed that they trace back within 4 years of the event. It describes the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, right? That's not made up many years later. Thus, there is no verifiable evidence of a Jesus in real documented history. Yes, there is, right? There's contemporary sources of Jesus written down by actual historians outside of the Bible. Yes, there is. On top of that, how on earth would 12 men turn into a 2 billion person religion that has lasted 2,000 years? Explain it. Why would people go under punishment of death proclaiming this and then never recant it, even if being crucified upside down, fed to the wolves, etc., that actually saw Jesus, right? Why did the Jews of the time, they didn't come and say Jesus didn't exist, right? They came and said, oh, he wasn't who he said he was, right? The Jews that lived at that time, the opposing sources, right? The opposition, the Jewish people at the time that rejected Jesus, that crucified Jesus at that time, why on earth wouldn't they say Jesus didn't even exist? No, you know what they said? He was a sorcerer. He did witchcraft, right? We can't explain the miracles he did. he wasn't true. They didn't say he didn't exist. Yeah, no Roman said he didn't exist. Nobody, even in the first several hundred years, people that came against Christianity, that wrote against Christianity, etc., never raised this claim, right? This is a new claim 1800 years later. Absolutely false. Tons of documented history, tons of documented evidence about Jesus. Absolutely false. And he goes on and says, then many of these stories, but not all, as many were not chosen. Show me those, please. There are more than just 4 gospels, but only these 4 were agreed on. Okay, because they came 100 years later, like you're saying. That's why the Gnostic Gospels never came into play, and they were nonsense, right? They were never, ever, ever accepted by the early church. Show me evidence of a consensus in the church that accepted the Gnostic Gospels. The Nag Hammadi Library, the Gospel of Judas, the Gospel of Thomas, the Infancy Gospel of Thomas, the Evangelion of Peter, the Evangelion of James, the Gospel of Mary, the Acts of Peter, right? Any of these books, show me a source that says the early church accepted these. Ever. Ever. Not History Channel with spooky music and people making deceptive editing and video editing and stuff like that. Show me a historical source that says that, please. It says, they were compiled for one self-absorbed converted Roman emperor in his Nicene Council. Actually, no, right? Show me they have the transcripts from the Council of Nicaea. They discuss the deity of Jesus, right? Is Jesus God or is he a man, right? That was the discussion at the Council of Nicaea. They didn't go in a smoky room and say, okay, this book, the Gospel of Thomas is not going in our Bible, and the Gospel of Mark is going in our Bible. They didn't do that, right? Show me evidence, a historical scholar, a historical source that says they did that or anything close to that. No. All you're going to get is YouTube videos made by uninformed people who are biased that say that kind of garbage. Not true. It says, for his express purpose of conquest and control of the people of Europe and his Holy Roman Empire. The Holy Roman Empire didn't come around until the 700, 800 AD, right? Rome was in control at the time of the Council of Nicaea, so there was no control, right? There was opposition to Christianity. It was a persecuted religion, right? From I think it's Diocletian or Domitian, I think it's Diocletian, before was persecuting Christians. All Constantine did was make Christianity legal, right? In a pagan society. He didn't forcibly convert pagans. Show me a historical source of that. Show me a history book that actually says that. Show me a reliable educational source that says these things, right? It is absolutely fallacious, absolutely false, because you can't. Okay. Next thing he says, he recognized that this was the perfect religion / mythology for the future domination of the populaces. How? How? Acts chapter 5, they're rebelling against the government. They tell them don't preach Jesus, they do it anyways, right? How? Show me from the Bible. Like how? How is this the perfect future domination of the populaces? This is just fallacious, false. Half of the stories were ignored by the Nicene bishops, and none have been proven to be based on the fact. What? There's evidence for this stuff, right? There's evidence for a lot of the stuff in the Gospels, right? When it says that something is standing in a place where it stands, it does that, right? And I think it's in Matthew, the story, I think it's in Matthew 17, 18, somewhere around there. I don't have a Bible in front of me. Literally, Matthew gets the translation between a drachma and a denarii right at the exact time in the first century. So how is that not verifiable evidence? How is Paul getting Mars Hill right, and it's like getting every single place in the book of Acts verifiable, and you can see it. You can go to a map, you can taste it, you can touch it. Again, Erastus, the treasurer of Corinth. Why is his name from the first century written and recorded as the treasurer of Corinth? Right? The Pilate stone, Pontius Pilate being the governor of Judea. That's evidence, again, for the New Testament. There's tons for the Old Testament, right? Things that actually would leave behind verifiable archaeological things. We have it, right? No historical scholar says this kind of just nonsense. Okay, next thing he says is they're ignored. by the Nicene bishops, and none have been proven to be based on fact. Again, false. The Babel book is backed up by absolutely no facts or evidence. Prove it. Show me something that contradicts it. Show me an archaeological discovery that contradicts it. There's supernatural archaeological discoveries. Literally, look up the excavation of Jericho, right, from the book of Joshua. It literally says that the walls fell down and there was one part in the wall that was left up, and that's because of Rahab the prostitute. That's what it says in Joshua, right? They've done an excavation of Jericho, and literally exactly the way the Bible describes it. They have pottery full of grain still, so the people weren't sitting in there getting sieged. If you look up how ancient battles were fought, they didn't wait outside the walls like normal for years when they sealed themselves in. No, the walls suddenly fell down, and they got killed, just like Joshua says. And there's archaeological evidence to prove it. Right? Look up the excavations of biblical Sodom and Gomorrah. They find sulfur deposits. Right? The equivalent of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Again, I already referenced the whales inside of high mountains, right? How else would they get there unless the world was covered with water? Explain that to me. Google it, please. And show me a historical discovery that contradicts the Bible. That's what you would need to make these claims, is a contradiction. There's tons of evidence. It says it is not proof of any gods or any Jesus as a god. Yes, it is, right? If you actually read the Bible makes supernatural claims. It literally predicts the future. Look up the prophecy of Tyre, right? And how that breaks down. Read Daniel chapter 2 and Daniel chapter 7 and Daniel chapter 9. Literally in Daniel chapter 2 and Daniel chapter 7, written in the time of the Babylonian Empire, he predicts the Persian Empire is going to come next. And then the Greek Empire is going to come next. And then the Roman Empire is going to come next, right? How would he know that unless, that's not something that if man can tell the future, dude, if I could tell the future, I'd go win the lottery 100 times. Man can't tell the future. Those are supernatural characteristics. Literally, Isaiah chapter 40 and verse 22, it says God sits on top of the circle of the earth, right? The circle. 1492, when Columbus sailed the ocean blue, they still didn't get this right. They thought the earth was flat. The Bible says it's round because God sits on top of the circle of the earth, right? Look it up. Dude, the Bible says the earth is round. Literally, Isaiah was written in 800 BC, 2,200 years before Columbus thought he was going to fall off the map trying to discover America, right? There's tons. Look up scientific evidence for the Bible. Tons. Look up archaeological evidence for the Bible. Tons of stuff. Tons of evidence that shows that this stuff could not have come from the mind of man but came from God, right? Tons of stuff. It's not proof of any gods or any as Jesus is God. If the Bible claims, and it has supernatural claims about other things that are verifiable, and then it says things like John 1:1, in the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. The Bible claims that has supernatural claims in it, says that Jesus is God, right? That's why Christians believe Jesus is God, because the Bible says in the New Testament over 14 or 15 times that Jesus is God. That's why, right? Then it says, the fables are intertwined within historical places and people, e.g. Egypt and the pharaohs existed, whereas Moses and the Exodus didn't happen. Yeah, it did, right? Yeah, it did. Look up a documentary called Evidence for the Exodus. I don't have 2 hours to break it down. There's tons of evidence for the Exodus. There's tons of evidence for the people. There's literally, look up the Iparu papyri, right? There's archaeological evidence that describes the plagues that are described in the book of Exodus, that were coming on the Egyptians and how they gave their stuff away, right? Google Iparu papyrus compared to the book of Exodus. Exactly happened. There's tons of archaeological evidence for the Exodus. That's just false and fallacious. Again, I don't have the time for a documentary that the documentary is. Look up evidence for the Exodus. Then he says, it is a historical novel only. No, it's not, right? The Bible's the truth. It is a fact, right? Show me a contradiction. Show me a fallacious claims, right? Please show me something in reality that contradicts the Bible. It says the Bible is proof of a book only. Certainly not evidence for any gods. Prove it. Prove it. If there's no God, what created us, right? Show me a scientific example from matter creating itself. Where do we come from, right? We know that the universe is not eternal. Look up the redshift in the galaxy, right? We know that Einstein proved it with his theory of relativity that the universe had a beginning. What is the source? An explosion created everything and it made perfect order. And then 12 billion years later, a bolt of lightning struck a pond and it created life that evolved into. That's nonsense, dude. Absolute nonsense. In the beginning, God, Genesis 1:1, created the heavens and the earth. It's the most factual based explanation for what we see. And logically, only the God of the Bible could have created everything. Not Zeus, not Hercules, not any of these made up pagan gods. Only the God of the Bible could have done these things. And it's a logical case, it's a sound case. Man, do some study, dude. Seriously. This is the kind of stuff that you see on the internet all the time being propagated. And my Christian friends that are watching this, learn this stuff. We have a faith that is founded on the rock. Matthew chapter 7, Jesus says, "He who hears these sayings of mine and does them, I'm going to liken them to a man who built his house on the rock." And when the storms came and the flood came and people tried to shake it, people tried to make up fallacious, propaganda against it, nothing could shake it, right? Because it's based on a fact, right? Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and no man comes to the Father except through him. He's coming back in flaming fire, and he's gonna judge the world one day, right? And I hope you're right, man. I hope you really do your evidence. I love you. I mean, I hope you do your research and find out the truth. Look at the evidence, examine it, right? This is the truth. This isn't just a false claim. Um, I'd love to have dialogue with you, man. I'd love to talk to you about this stuff. But please don't just go around to random Facebook pages leaving recommendations. And guys, 1 Peter 3:15 says, "Always be ready to give a defense for the hope that is in you, yet do it with gentleness and respect." I'm not trying to be disrespectful with anything in this video. I'm just trying to bring clarity to the situation because people propagate this stuff all the time, right? But people, shouldn't go around attacking women's ministries that are literally only trying to help women. But, this is what happens when you're the head of the ministry's husband is into apologetics and studies this stuff, man. So I hope this is informative. God bless you guys and have a good evening. Thanks.